Welcome, everybody, to another Booze Hour, this time a community edition. We'll have Jake King on in just a second here. Wanted to go over just a couple things with everybody. Let's see. If you haven't already, if you're watching via YouTube, hit subscribe below. There's a little bell. You can hit that too and have notifications every time I go live and every time a new video is released. We are releasing content 3 times a week. So there's a Monday weekly update show. We'll usually have a guest on that. I'll go through F5 technical updates. There will be a cloud edition show. That's usually a technical show, a little bit more of a hands-on or something's happening with a guest usually on that one as well. And then this community edition. And the community edition is outside of my work world and just meant to spread positivity and hopefully inspire folks. There's some people that I can think of that I'd love to bring on here, folks like Jake who have good messages that we can share with everybody else. So that's the intent of Community Edition. Community Edition is also one that I post publicly on my Facebook. So you might be watching from that. And if you are, if you wouldn't mind heading over to YouTube and hitting subscribe, there's just another way to consume the content as well. And I also ripped down the audio from this and I turned it into a podcast format as well. So far, just the community edition I do that with. So hopefully folks will find that as a useful way or a productive way to consume this content as well. A couple of things. I also started an Instagram account. So there's Booze Hour on Instagram. I only just post clips on there. So I kind of take the best of and the highlights from our community edition and I post it on there. And I also created a separate YouTube channel called Booze Hour B-Roll. And that one is also just clips, similar clips that you'd find on Instagram anyways, just more ways to engage with us on there. But everything that doesn't make it into the main stream channel, maybe some bloopers, maybe some extra add-on bits. I cut down the weekly show by quite a bit. There's actually a lot more footage that doesn't get aired. So I've found another way to get that content out there without having to clutter up the main channel. Besides that, last week was F5 Agility 2020, at least as far as the breakout sessions and the keynotes. So if you head over to f5agility.com, all the content is on there on demand at this point. So while you won't be able to ask questions live of the presenters, you can still go on, consume any of the content that you want. If you have any questions, feel free to hit me up for any questions that you have. Also, on the last Booze Hour Cloud Edition, just this past Tuesday, I had on Jason Rom and John Wagnon, and we went over the F5 Agility content as far as what we thought was really relevant and what resonated with us. So you want to check that out as well. In the coming week, we'll have a couple more guests coming on for you. So I'll have HashiCorp on with me on Monday's weekly update. I'll have Peter Scheffler on with me on the cloud edition. And I have one more guest that we're just confirming for the community edition as well, but also kind of in the startup area, which I think is going to be really relevant for some of the folks right now who are looking to either change up what they're doing or just get a new perspective on how their business looks. So with that, I'm going to bring on Jake in a second here. Jake is a guy I met a few years ago, and I just thought he was really interesting and inspiring as far as what he's done with the company that he has and his progression to create this company. So without further ado, here is Jake. Jake, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Boo. Great to chat. Thanks for inviting me on.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. When I created Booze Hour Community Edition, and I had this idea that, hey, I know some people out in the industry, and not just in the industry, outside of the industry as well, but there are messages out there and there's stories to be told that can hopefully inspire people right now and going through what we're going through right now. But even beyond this, I think there's stories that need to be told, and yours was one of them. And I thought, you know what, once I get this going, I'm going to wait a little bit, get a couple episodes in, and then talk to Jake and say, hey, Jake, I got this thing. Would you like to come on? So I'm so glad that you came on.
No, thank you for having me, Boo. It's it's an incredible time to be alive right now. We're living through a a situation where not many generations before us have kind of felt the same thing. And so I guess with just how the world's digitally transformed, and just seeing how things have changed so rapidly with COVID, and really just having to move entire operations remote, it's just been incredible. So
Yeah.
more than happy to share the story, give you a little
And
bit of
it's
insight.
amazing that we can do it, right? Like
Yeah,
we have all
yeah.
this technology. 20 years ago, this would have been way different than what it is now. Like we're able to do this
Yeah, I mean,
without much effort.
gigabit internet connections and HD video streaming technology is just it's part of what we have at home, and it used to be the pipe dream of even businesses 10, 15 years ago. It's a
Totally.
bizarre situation. In some ways, the timing is uncanny when a lot of this technology has just started to reach its really kind of stable points in the industry. And look, it's bringing a lot of attention to the fact that folks can work remotely and
Yeah.
actually do really well, be really
Yeah.
productive.
So speaking of that, you are the co-founder and CEO of CMD. Why don't you spend like a minute telling us about what CMD does?
Yeah, yeah. So, CMD is a company that focuses on Linux and cloud security. We really try and bring a lot of insights and real telemetry with what's
Mm,
going on in people's cloud environments, and really handhold folks through that journey of actually trying to secure these systems in a pragmatic and realistic way. The company was born out of a lot of frustration that my co-founder had when
mm,
he was growing through his career and learning and really kind of building out insights into how infrastructure operates. And he'd seen dozens of attacks and some really unusual compromises, and really put together a really interesting story to talk about threats for Linux and how they were
mm.
different. And a couple of months after he'd come up with that kind of initial idea and started to put together some MVPs, we met and started talking about some of the challenges that I was solving at Hootsuite at the time. So it's an incredible story of
Mm.
just how adversaries changed, and really the solving those problems, how solving those problems is really different in the Windows world from what we see in cloud and in Linux.
Cool. I think
Yeah.
we're gonna dive into this as we go. So why don't we back up as far as you want to back up?
Yeah.
Where do you think your beginnings came from as far as technology goes? Was it a school thing? Were you
Yeah.
always into technology?
I think every person with a some kind of a technical background, remembers that one thing, that one kind
Mm,
of interesting point in their life where they start to get really excited about technology. And
mm,
I think a lot of mine stem from kind of just wanting to know how things worked. And
mm,
I think there was probably numerous times that my parents had put me in front of a piece of technology and I want to take it apart, or understand the nuts and bolts of how it's put together. And look, every time I'd kind of get a new piece of technology, I'd try to understand how it worked. And at first that was hardware. It's something you can touch,
mm,
feel, see. And it kind of started a pretty early journey for me to get really excited about electrical components,
mm,
electronic components and componentry, and really assembling kind of devices out of parts I'd kind of figured out how to use, or figured out the purpose behind. And a lot of my insight into computers was really kind of understanding how the hardware components worked first, and through family members, through folks that we had close to our family, taking some of that hardware knowledge and applying it to software, and seeing the kind of interface between the two start to make sense.
mm,
um, it was just such a kind of, in reflection, it was a really interesting time of my life, to be kind of early in the days of high speed internet in Australia,
mm,
and having some exposure to kind of the tech scene in the US, but very, very different. And
mm,
so kind of picking up some of those earlier traits, hardware to software, and that transition in between. It was just it was a crazy
mm,
journey, and it kind of started really early, really,
mm,
really early. I think as I started to get my feet underneath me, high school, going into university, it was like a pretty exciting journey of just actually figuring out how the software side of it worked. And look, it's exactly where it took me to have an interest in security. It's kind of
mm.
disassembling, figuring things out, and working out the flaws. in an
What
interesting way.
What was your first computer?
My first computer was my first real computer, I'd say. It's probably a family computer, but my first family computer was a 486 DX. It was a 486 DX, and I remember it having Encarta, and I
Yeah.
remember it was Windows 3.1, and at the time, I thought it was the coolest thing ever.
Hmm.
And pretty rapidly, I remember kind of that getting upgraded to like a Pentium 90, like the
Mm.
original Pentium 90. And at the
Yeah.
time, it was a pretty cool machine.
So
My uncle had put it together for my dad, and kind of taught me how to use it, taught me how to figure it out.
So for the really young kids that are watching right now, Encarta was before Wikipedia,
Yeah,
where
yeah.
where you'd have a CD or a disc where you could actually look up stuff. One of my first computers was very similar and came with Encarta.
It was funny because I remember, the coolest thing at the time was the software license agreements that came from
Mm.
Microsoft in paper, and they had these cool holographic stickers on them. And I remember at the time thinking it was just a really cool thing to have. And so, when you've been playing around with software for some time, it was kind of just like, it's a part of it's just the license key. But at the time, I thought it was really cool and something
Hmm.
brand new and very different in the world of technology that I hadn't really explored before. So, yeah,
Yeah.
I think it was definitely a pretty useful piece of software. I think it was probably less useful today than ever before, but super easy to get this stuff on Wikipedia anyway.
So if I'm figuring out the time frames correctly, then that was just as internet was getting going, all dial up at that time, BBSs perhaps.
No, I think it was probably a bit later than that.
Yeah.
I'm turning 31 this year, so
Oh,
bit
okay.
of a younger guy. I was born in 1989. So
Mm.
the internet certainly came along a lot earlier than that. But I remember it was kind of around that time where Windows 95 was starting to really take off, and in Australia we were certainly like lagging behind a lot of that kind of consumer tech. We did have internet at home, but it was mostly through my dad's business. He ran a home
Hmm.
business at the time, and I remember dial-up, 56K dial-up, probably 32.2, but 56K dial-up was like the thing.
Hmm.
BBS is less so much. A lot of
Yep.
ISA, kind of, a lot of
Okay.
those early kind of integration points. But I remember at the time in Australia there was a lot of local kind of network, local forums and local chatter that I was taking part in that back then,
Mm.
and um, yeah, very quickly kind of realized that 56K is pretty terrible to download anything, terrible to do anything in real scale with. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it was a bit of a funny one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. So from there, did you go to school in Australia then?
I did, yeah. I went to obviously did high school throughout high school. Kind of studied computers at the time. Funny story, got suspended for being suspected of cheating on a computer assignment at the time.
Okay.
Um, I think it was I either got suspended or detention or something horrible like that. But it was because I did the homework too quickly, or I did the homework in class, and everyone thought I was cheating on it. But at the time, yeah, kind of left high school, went to tech college, and actually learned network administration.
Mm.
Spent a little bit of time kind of understanding servers and hardware and infrastructure. Kind of dating myself a little bit. Learned Novell
Mm.
and scaled kind of scale environments in
That's
Novell.
useful.
Yeah, it's definitely stuff that I've kept with me today. I just remember the books being super expensive, and then
Mm.
eventually went and graduated from tech college to go to university. And at the time, made a bit of a gamble to study computer forensics. At the time, the
Mm.
course was called Cyber Forensics Information Security Management,
Mm.
and turned out that a very very long term kind of friend from kindergarten days actually chose to do the same course. So
Mm.
bit of a funny one. It was a bit of a reminiscent moment for us to kind of catch up in first year and start to learn about security in a real way.
Oh.
I think before then it was more so just kind of the red team side of it rather than the blue team side. So
Yeah.
an interesting time to be alive.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So, were you working right out of college in Australia, or did you like how did your migration go into
Yeah,
Canada?
yeah. So came over to Canada in kind of late 2013. I'd graduated high school, graduated university, tech college, and I've been running a consultancy
Mm.
business with a friend of mine. We did a lot of network configuration, took that in a couple of different places. Even got into hardware consultation, some pen testing, some things like that. Spent a lot of time red teaming back then as well,
Mm.
in some kind of cool programs. But yeah, ended up moving over to North America and specifically in Vancouver, with a family member that was here, who
Mm.
said, look, she kind of gave me a space and said, look, I'll be out of town a lot. You can come and have my Yale town apartment and
Okay.
stay with me. So I can't really complain about the entryway to Vancouver.
Yeah.
But made the choice to come over here just out of a lot of really interesting reasons.
Mm.
When I came over, my first entry point to the US was San Francisco, looking for some kind of interesting work down there.
Mm.
But I actually came over with a close friend of mine, at the time, and attended DEF CON 21 after watching
Mm.
it on YouTube for years and years and years before then. And I guess
Mm.
before YouTube, it was probably on the DEF CON archive server.
Mm.
So it was kind of a bit of an entryway to North American life. Spent a bit of time in the US, ended up coming up to Vancouver, and really quickly getting a job with Hootsuite,
Okay.
and a bit of familiarity with the tech on that side, which was super interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, that's pretty cool. So you uh, uh, are Australian and did not go to Whistler immediately.
No,
Or,
I think I was actually having a conversation earlier this week with someone about kind of this notion of Australians immediately landing and heading straight back to Australia Junior up in Whistler.
yeah.
I got to say, I do love skiing. I do love Whistler. But the I guess the funny thing about being an Australian in Vancouver is a lot of people think you're going up here for skiing, or you're
Mm.
you're on holidays. Going straight into tech on a working holiday visa was a bit strange.
Mm.
I think at the time when I went to renew my visa, they said, "Oh, it's valid use of the visa." It was just a bit of an unusual one, so a bit of an interesting one. Canada and Australia have an amazing kind of exchange program for young
Mm.
professionals. So under 30, the process is pretty easy. It's a pretty streamlined process to get a working visa here in Canada, and kind of moving over to Canada to work in tech was really exciting. I mean, I'd heard of Hootsuite for years beforehand, and
Mm.
kind of, had seen a lot of the history of the company grow, and obviously seen a lot of the conversation about security on the platform, kind of shared out publicly on the internet previously, and kind of got pretty excited. I think at the time they were only hiring for kind of junior IT tech folks, so took that
Mm.
job and quickly moved into InfoSec in the company as well. So it was a
What?
bit of an interesting one.
Yeah. What year did you join Hootsuite?
Probably would have been around 2013, late
Okay.
2013. So it was just after pretty quickly after I arrived here.
Yeah.
They were in this hypergrowth phase, and
Yeah.
they'd moved into 5 East 8th, which is their HQ, one of the coolest buildings to work out of in Vancouver, I'd say.
Mm.
It was the old kind of like police barracks, and
Mm.
so the place was wired for sound, and it was military grade kind of bollards and protection on the doors, and everything was twin locked, and there was some kind of cool places there. So it was an amazing building to come and work out of. But at the time, I didn't realize how quickly the company was growing, and how rapidly the technology was being adopted. Ryan had built an incredible company and really amazing culture, and I think it
Mm.
became very attractive for a lot of folks wanting to join a startup here in Vancouver.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's been it's quite the success story here in Vancouver. And I'm actually in talks with Bear.
Oh
Uh,
yeah,
they
yeah.
will
What a
come on.
great guy. He's another one of the kind of the Hootsuite glitterati, I'll say.
Mm.
He was definitely part of the fold there. I think the most interesting thing about that team, is they've dispersed across dozens of different companies here in Vancouver, even going down the US, into international places as well. And it was a great crew. It was a really fun
Mm.
time and a really great crew to be part of, just an incredible rocket ship, from a growth perspective.
So how many employees were there when you joined?
Um, I find it kind of hard to remember the exact count, because the day that I joined, I think I onboarded about 20 people. So,
Mm.
so it was kind of funny. I got the job. They said, "Look, welcome. We want you to come in," and Tanya Miller, the IT
Yeah.
director at the time, who was managing kind of that part of the ecosystem, had actually said to me, "Come in on Friday, come and have a beer and come and enjoy." And it actually turned out that the IT guy at the time, one of the kind of senior IT guys at the time, Ken Esqueta, was at that point deciding to go on a holiday, and he was taking off for Mexico. I think it was Mexico the week that I started,
Mm.
and he'd brought on a couple of junior folks and said, "Hey, here you go. Get it going. Let's actually
Wow.
kind of see how this goes." And so I kind of got thrown into the deep end. Did a bunch of account setup. At the time, one of the other IT folks that started was an amazing woman by the name of Stephanie, and I'll never forget the day that I messed up her Kerberos account creation and gave her something very unique. It caused her problems for years. So sorry, Steph. This is to say sorry to you. Yeah.
Oh, wow. So
Yeah.
that's like you were saying, that's a pretty incredible time to join Hootsuite when they're going through that hyper growth phase.
Yeah, it was at most 300 employees, to probably between 200 and 300 at the time. And
Mm.
even then, it was the week that I started was just this incredible time for the company in general. They had just really started sharing a lot of the content on the platform out really really well. They were getting users signing up hand over fist, and at the time I remember there was a lot of sales, a lot of marketing getting brought on. And it was really, kind of becoming a real big company. They just finished that fundraising round, and
Mm.
obviously had kind of started that massive, rocket ship growth. And at the time, I remember everything in the building was kind of like, brand new. It had been operating for a couple of months, 6 months, 7 months, and I remember, little things like the Wi-Fi dropping out, or this nightmare scenario for every one of the sales reps in that
Mm.
building. But we were pushing that infrastructure pretty hard for what it was supposed to be doing, and I think, it was a fun time to be there. It was a really fun time to be in in the infrastructure side there too.
Yeah, no, that's
Yeah.
pretty cool. And so from a security perspective, like what do you think or what would you say your main roles were there?
Yeah, so pretty early on, actually, I started to take on a lot of security responsibility, and it was little things at first. It was some infrastructure hardening, some deployments of systems, some log management, monitoring stuff. Ended up doing a bunch of wireless testing and kind of audit testing. And at the time, Hootsuite was trying to bring on a director of security and compliance. Ended up finding kind of director for the time, and ended up kind of working with that director pretty closely on a lot of the really early initiatives. And what started to become really apparent was there was a lot of legacy to go through. There was a lot of infrastructure that had been built. They actually had a data center at the time, Equinix. I think it was running Owly,
Mhm.
the URL shortener,
Mm.
and it was a lot of hardware, a lot of Dell, kind of Blade servers.
Mhm.
And at the time, it was just a really kind of greenfield security opportunity. There was a solid security practice, and I think Bear and Simon at the time had done a good job of understanding that security was really important, and kind of realized very early on that security was supposed to be built in very early on. And it wasn't to say that there was completely built out infrastructure or incredibly verbose systems that were reporting on vulnerabilities and threats at the time. There wasn't too much at all, but it was a relatively modern deployed system, and I think in a lot of ways that certainly helped kind of trying to defend it. But
Mhm.
at the time as well, they'd embraced DevOps culture really early on. And
Mhm.
I remember, I'd find vulnerabilities in the application or find bugs or issues. And there was just a really good response to kind of how security was treated. People treated it really seriously.
Mm.
And we'd very early on hired, at the time, he was security architect, eventually became the CISO, George Pajari. Who's
Okay.
one of my absolute mentors in the space, and a person I really look up to from a security perspective, and actually from a business acumen perspective. He's an incredible entrepreneur who's done great things in the community in the past, and has done some amazing businesses even now. But I think what became really interesting was, sitting down with George and building a calendar for every day we found something, was a pretty eye-opening experience, and looking at a pragmatic way to actually defend systems and build defenses when not a lot was in place was super exciting.
Mm.
was my first kind of real production grade intrusion detection system deployment. We rolled it out live across, millions of user accounts on, thousands of systems. And,
Mm.
even at that point in time, under the guidance of George and eventually Erwin John, who joined as the CISO prior to George taking that position, had just really built a solid security practice. And at the time, it was exciting to be part of that motion and that move. I guess the one thing that always surprised me about Hootsuite was just how well security was brought into the fold.
Mm.
You tend to get that kind of negative connotation when it comes to security teams, but we really threaded the needle to build a persona for security that was attractive,
Mm.
and collaborative, not detractive, and all about no. Security was really about enabling that organization, and fortunately we did what I think is a really great job of bringing that kind of security discipline to an organization that really hadn't had much in the past. And it was an exciting time for all. I mean, our security team was just a really great crew of folks, folks that I would love to work again with in the future.
Mm.
Some of which I do. So it's
Well,
all part of the fun.
so interesting that you guys had such success in integrating security into a DevOps environment. Was that from just making the tools available and easy for developers to consume from you, or did you guys have to have a hand in getting it implemented with the DevOps folks?
I think there was a lot that was difficult, and it's not to say that there weren't pressures and challenges around kind of getting the organization to adopt security practices. But I think one thing that we did really well is security awareness.
Mm.
We made everyone responsible for the work that they were doing, and in turn, I think that responsibility got everyone to really care about the problems they were solving day to day, and they'd think security, and then they'd think security again. And I think a lot of it came out of the premise that when new employees were starting, even in that hypergrowth phase, George and I would, put on orange hard hats and vests and make a bit of a show out of security training,
Of course.
make security really really visible in the organization. We were really massive evangelists over how security can make things better and improve things. But also we had a good response. I think it was partly the culture in Vancouver being very open to security being something exciting, something interesting, something new. But also Hootsuite had just an amazing culture of hiring people that were very collaborative in the first place.
Mm.
The talent team there knew how to pick a profile and knew how to bring people in that would culturally fit really well within the organization. And
Mm.
security became part of that culture. I think one of my favorite videos actually that George ever did was him explaining some kind of policy that was rolling out and changing across the organization. And it was filmed in a basement in the office. He was sitting in a kind of a floor size or wall size safe, and he'd open the door, and it was fun. Little things like having a ceremony around kind of key access when we would unlock our AWS root account for whatever reason around billing. It was about bringing security. It was about bringing fun into security, but treating it in a really serious way that made people see that the things that they were doing were important.
Mm.
But we also talked a lot about just the responsibility we had as a company to defend what is the 75% at the time. I think it was 75% of the Fortune 1000, right? We had social media credentials for all of these incredible
Mm.
businesses. And just an incredible responsibility to solve problems for them and defend their infrastructure. People cared, and I think that care kind of really showed in many different ways. But it really showed in the attention to detail that folks had in actually applying security best practices, applying the things they should do. It was a good time. It was a really, really good time. And I think it did influence a lot of how we build Cmd, and a lot of why, Maloon and I got along so well early on. We had a really similar perspective on building good security tech. It didn't
Mm.
need to be terrible. It needed to be awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's probably a good segue into CMD. Is this a brainchild of something that you had come up with at Hootsuite, or was he working with you at the time, or how
No,
did
so Maloon had actually, he wasn't working with me at the time. Maloon had been building a business out of Vancouver, business called Metro Lyrics. He sold it to CBS and
that?
had been running this company for years. He was an incredibly young entrepreneur and a really successful entrepreneur at that. And at the time, he'd been ideating in the space of Linux for some time. And to be honest with you, Boo, I think when I was on the security team at Hootsuite, there wasn't a day where I wasn't thinking about that production fleet of systems.
Mm,
And a lot of what Maloon and I, agreed on when we first met, it was actually an intro through both the CEO and my boss at the time, Erwin.
mm,
Um, that we both had shared this kind of same sentiment in the fact that Linux didn't need to be super difficult. And I
mm,
remember he put together this really quick prototype with a pretty junior dev. I guess he's actually pretty senior dev, and a junior kind of Linux engineer. And I basically took a look at it and I said, dude, this is cool, but it's not a security product. It's really not a security product. But at the time, it was just super interesting to kind of go through it with him and explain kind of the day to day of kind of how security was actually applied in an enterprise, in a business, and Hootsuite in a DevOps centric way. And so when Maloon and I kind of started talking really early on, there was lots of ideas getting thrown around, and he'd really lived a lot of the pain of just production infrastructure being really difficult. And I'd lived a lot of pain of having to kind of thread the needle with duct tape and twine on kind of binding a lot of open source, what I would call at the time, pretty much junk stuff,
mm,
together to make something work. And it was at that point where I started to take a really strong interest in what this market opportunity was. And look, from that point, it was kind of it was on for forever. Maloon and I got along really well, and we balanced out each other's strengths and acumen. He was a really astute, kind of entrepreneur, experienced entrepreneur, and at the time I was just a really strong technologist.
mm,
And as we grew the business, as that business kind of concept started to dwell, I think he very rapidly realized, hey, look, this is something that's going to take on a life of its own and really become something really security minded. When Maloon and I started conceptualizing the ideas, I remember those first few prototypes we put together, and kind of you throw things at the wall, you see what sticks. It kind of goes back and forth, and the early team that we had there is still amazing. They're still just a huge part of the company today, and it was really at that time that we realized that, look, there's a different way to look at security for Linux. There's an easier way to look at security for Linux, and look, it was just because I've been super passionate about it, and working with someone like Maloon just unlocked a lot of that potential. It was those network connections that he had, and the folks that he'd met along the way that just really enabled us to run.
mm,
And you just think every day, like, wow, like the crazy amount of kind of opportunity that we had at the time was awesome. And even today, the landscape has only got more complicated. It's only got more sophisticated, and look, the adversary hasn't really changed, because the security posture a lot of the companies that we work with and help out has not really changed beyond what they were doing with that duct tape and twine, like me.
yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe we can talk about early days. This was something that Maloon and you had, just evenings and weekends. You guys were scratching it out, still
Yeah,
working.
so Maloon was at the time focused with a very early stage VC back then called Expa.
Mm,
And Expa was somewhat of a studio model at that point in time. And so Maloon was a partner, and he still is a partner at Expa, but he was a partner at Expa, and really it was that kind of initial seed funding and opportunity to kind of work on something new.
mm,
And yeah, it was evenings, weekends, nights, mornings, early mornings, prototyping and figuring things out. And look, it got to a point where I thought, look, I'm absolutely in love with this problem, and it's something that, look, I want to do full time. And
mm,
we'd crafted a small team together by that point, and Maloon said, like, I think this is go, and we put it together and really started to ramp it. Expa's model was really incredible because what it focused on doing was really looking at industry experts, people that had lived the pain or lived the problem that they were going through, and being able to apply that problem in a really pragmatic way. And with Maloon's experience, we were able to take what was the kind of early inefficiencies of kind of software dev, building a team, finding people, getting company and org set up, and really work with Expa on a lot of that. And it was great. It was a really awesome experience, but really kind of a soft kickoff. And a lot of founders that I think approach studios or VCs very early on have that really hard time. I was really fortunate enough to have met someone that was really closely tied to those early days of fundraising and really bootstrapping the business, and was able to lean on it heavily. In hindsight, I think a lot of the companies kind of coming into the fold at the time we're looking at the studio model as well, and look, it's an incredibly efficient way to move very fast very early on. It brings a lot of discipline to the way that you design and build. It puts you in networks that you would never be able to get influence from, and in a lot of ways it de-risks a lot of how you build technology. We were able to work fast and hire some folks and get started early, and really move the needle quite rapidly before actually going out and fundraising and kind of talking to early VCs. It was pretty much a very, very scrappy Water Street apartment kind of startup, and it kind of quickly grew from there. I think we kind of found this early technical fit that it's hard to describe, but you kind of know it when you see it. And it got exciting. And the more we talked to CISOs, and the more we talked to, at the time, sales reps in Vancouver, the person that introduced us directly, Blake Mitchell, who got really excited about this kind of future opportunity of something built for production, something built for DevOps, and turning it into reality. And I think that premise is just it's the days everyone gets hungry for. It's especially being an entrepreneur. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of hard work, but it's a lot of fun. And kind of getting into that fold was an interesting experience as someone who was very, very technically focused before.
Yeah, well, so maybe for the folks who are listening that aren't so much in the tech arena, maybe we can chat about the mechanics of VC for a second. So normally somebody has an idea that they want to create a product and a company out of. They either start bootstrapping it themselves, or they talk to friends and family and they get a bit of angel money that way. And then after that, once it grows enough, they can start talking to VC firms, venture capital firms, and say, "Hey, I got this idea. If you want a piece of this, let's exchange some money here, and you keep me going and allow me to scale."
Yeah, that's it. That's effectively right. The one kind of difference around this is there's friends and family kind of relationships tend to be even very early stage studios, and what started to happen in the VC world is that you'll hear things, you'll hear about groups like Expa who can help you facilitate those early days and provide that safe space to build a business, really in a somewhat kind of structured way, very flexible. You're able to ideate, you're able to design and kind of innovate, but it takes that kind of initial step. It takes a lot of that initial research. And so, you're right, Boo. It's really about kind of finding investors that believe in your vision, believe in the mission that you have, and believe that you can build the team, you can find the crew to assemble it and turn it into a reality. And then further stages are really just an acceleration of that. The way that you measure, the value of a company is, the kind of technology they're producing, the intellectual property they might have, the type of the team, the market opportunity.
Hmm.
And those factors tend to be kind of a little bit softer in the very early days.
Yeah.
As you start to scale a business, it's tied to things like revenue. It's tied to things like expansion and growth. It can even be tied to things like kind of strategic advantages. And really the venture community is there to learn and listen and understand. What you as an entrepreneur, regardless of what you happen to specialize in, might have uncovered, might have actually discovered. And I think that that secret discovery that a lot of people have is kind of strange. I'm often surprised when I speak to folks about kind of knowing something about an industry or a space that they might not know. And it's from the unique vantage points that all of us have that we draw from that influence, and obviously how you can kind of bootstrap and convince investors to believe in that vision and mission too.
Yeah, and they can be hesitant because if you think of the odds, and you guys have been very successful, but
Mm.
in most cases, even if you do get that VC funding, 9 times out of 10, you don't make it out the first couple of years, and the VC can just pull out and say, you know what, this doesn't look like it's going nowhere.
It's not going to go anywhere. Yeah, and I think a lot of that is really just, it's tied to just how difficult it is to find what's known in the industry as product market fit. There are challenges that we all have as entrepreneurs in understanding that this is a problem that not only I want to solve, but the broader part of the market wants to solve.
Mhm.
And it's a challenge that a lot of people feel. But I think on the other side of it, what I've always found quite interesting is not only does it have to be the right technology or the right solution or the right kind of widget, let's call it, it needs to be the right price. It needs to be delivered in the right way. The messaging needs to be right behind it. And so there's a lot of things to thread the needle on. And look, it's not easy. And I think any founder that kind of indicates that it can be is either very, very lucky. They've found that fit before, or they're really experienced. They really, truly, absolutely fundamentally understand the problem that they're solving, and the market and the way that market's going to shift and turn goes their way. Some of it's luck, some of it's just right timing, and look, I don't know, but Linux has been growing, so I think we were in the right place at the right time, and at the time I think it took a lot of really deep thought, and look, it's not something that you have hit a finish line with. It's a continuous journey that you have to continuously validate yourself against, and look, everyone's got to iterate, everyone's got to change and shift the way that they sell their products and what they build to stay relevant. It's a never ending story.
So was that a lot of your early time, or maybe still is a lot of your time, is
Yeah.
product market fit?
You know what? I think every company is really kind of constantly measuring themselves against how a market wants to consume the thing that they do, the technology that they build, or even the problem that they solve. Is it still a problem? You look at take for example what we do with securing production infrastructure, securing Linux systems. You think about how Linux infrastructure changed since 2016, 2015, 2014, 2013, and you look at the solutions today. You call that next gen AV that came out a few years ago maybe not so next gen anymore. And I think where we have to be really aware as entrepreneurs, as people that want to build something new, you've got to stay ahead of that technology and the fit. It's about keeping up, but it's also about kind of building a momentum behind the thing that you are doing. And that momentum really helps kind of overcome different obstacles. So, I think I look at the challenges that every business faces. Are we buying the right kind of coffee for my coffee shop? Do people like the taste of it, right? It's everything minute to that. To are we in the right location? Are we selling to the right audience? Is our brand putting people off? And it's that constant balance that you have to be completely aware of. And to be honest, you've got to be obsessively focused about it. The only head start that you have is if you've lived that pain. And fortunately, I'd lived a lot of the pain of trying to lock down infrastructure, and kind of knew some of the things that others in the industry might have wanted to kind of do on their side too. So it's a very fine line. But yeah, constant kind of adjustments and tweaks and changes, and then optimization as soon as you find that fit.
So we fast forward a couple of years from your starting days, and you guys managed to land funding from Google Ventures, which
Yeah.
is no joke.
Yeah,
Get
yeah.
it.
Even before then, we'd raised with a group of investors called Amplify Partners, Norwest Venture Partners, and Expa. Again, and Expa's stayed on it as an investor and has Amplify. But one
Mm,
of the things that's become really interesting is you you get through those early stages of ideation. You find some early adopters, and then you start to identify pattern. And that's
mm,
really when later stage investors start to take an interest in the product that you're building or the technology that you're building. And I wouldn't say kind of it's all about one particular metric. It's a balance of a lot. It's got to be a continuation of vision, alignment with what that investor believes is an incredible market opportunity,
mhm,
um, and finding a fit between how visionary someone is with a market and how realistic solving that problem truly is.
mm,
And it's when you start to get into those conversations with investors, they start to get more excited about a market opportunity.
mm,
I think I think CMD started in a time when when there was a serious interest in security for the cloud. And there was a very strong driver just around the same time that we started around cloud migrations, cloud entry points. And more recently, we're starting to see that shift and change into containers and containerization namespace technology. And it's
mhm,
really talking to investors in language that they understand, in the way that they're influenced as well. Talking to the CISOs, the CIOs, the CTOs, the business operators, the owners, the consumer of your technology,
mm,
and how that aligns with where you feel you can take the company and where the company's actually going to go.
mm,
But it's a journey, and as you bring on new investors, you get new challenges.
mm.
Revenue becomes a real target, and scale and growth and everything in between. It draws a certain type of focus that kind of when you're steering the ship, you have to really understand completely and coherently. And it takes a village. It's as you start to bring on that new funding, you need experts in sales, experts in marketing, experts in technology that you've got to have on your side to convey that message and effectively help you scale a business too.
How big is CMD at this point?
We are 43, 44 people. 44 people. And a lot of folks that aren't kind of full-time employees. We actually take strong advantage of folks that are consultants, contractors,
Mm,
advisors. And it's one of the ways that you have to scale a business.
mm,
When you look at building a technology business, especially technology, people have a lot of subject matter expertise that you've got to take advantage of at a specific point in time. And understanding how to balance efficiencies behind when you hire and why you hire really drives you to find these experts.
mm.
I have an incredible design team. Many of them are consultants for the company, and it's because they've helped us in many different areas, different ways, and it undulates. The amount of time we need to spend with them undulates. And when you bring on full time people, it's a lot of responsibility. You've got to think, wow, this person's going to be working with me for 40 hours a week. Startups, it's often a lot more. But I think when you think about the kind of challenges that you've got to face, it's about right sizing the team, building that team, and scaling to a point where you're comfortable with that team. And sometimes it takes some late nights to figure out you need maybe one or two more people on that group. But it's a lot of fun, and it paints a really exciting picture. That the team is awesome, and
Mm.
I'm so proud of just how we've hired people and the kind of people we've hired and the work that they do. I look at a lot of our technology and think in the early days of me prototyping and writing some terrible scripts and automation and seeing how our DevOps team builds and scales infrastructure compared to what I was doing is just light years ahead. And it's awesome to see that handover work so well, and that trust be put in people that are just absolutely amazing at what they do in areas that even I struggle to understand: marketing, sales.
Mm.
It's a lot of fun. There's a lot of nuance though. It's just as deep as anything on the kind of software engineering or security side, if not
So,
more.
like you mentioned at Hootsuite, culture fit was a huge part of hiring. Is that
Yeah.
also, I'm imagining that's also a big part of how you guys hire and how you guys want to scale?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the right hire in a team has the ability to uplift and really drive people in an amazing way. And it goes above and beyond just someone having the right technical chops. When you're building that team, you want to find people that share the similar thesis to you. They have similar drivers. They're encouraged by the same kind of things. They deal with adversaries in the same way. And I think it's about finding the right profiles, right? You've got to really pick how your team works, and look, everybody has just been driven completely remote. This has changed the kind of ways we hire and the kind of people we might hire as well, and it's really thinking about how culturally people are going to match. I was really
Hmm.
fortunate. When I went to Hootsuite, Australian guy. I'm pretty friendly. I'm pretty funny. I got a strange accent. Everyone's pretty happy and chill to chat. But it was an experience that everybody had when they joined that company, and one that is hard to replicate. But it takes discipline. It takes processes in place. And look, we've got an amazing talent team at CMD that's been able to really find the kind of people that share that same thesis and want to work in the same ways. And look, a lot of the time, the technical skills, the hard skills that you have to have, um, are going to match the kind of people that you want to hire anyway. They're generally the kind of problems you need to solve, and sometimes it's threading the needle. I mean, we've scaled in Boston and now throughout the East Coast of even into parts of Canada. It's just interesting. You find great people in some interesting places.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. So these days well, I'll leave it open to you. What's keeping you up at night? Like what are your number one
Oh,
struggles as
as someone running a business through what is a pretty tumultuous time.
Mhm,
I think the thing we all need to focus on here is not only the health and well being of our staff and team members, their families, their friends, because that impacts the way people work. It impacts the way that they interact with others. It impacts their mood. It's really about navigating how this is going to change potentially everything.
mhm,
Um, we're looking at different ways to live stream, to have events online rather than in person, to change strategies, to change targets, to change the finish line on a lot of different things. And look, even for us, trying different go to market motions, trying different
mhm,
ways to approach getting in front of our customers, getting in front of our consumers, because they're working from home now. They're doing very different things.
mhm,
So I think it's definitely situational. But at the same time, I think the one thing that keeps every founder up at night is how is the market shifting? Where's the
mhm,
latest technology coming from? What is Amazon going to release next month? What is
mhm,
what are other vendors going to be shipping? What are other entrepreneurs thinking about, and how can we remain competitive? But not only that, thinking about how we innovate and leveraging that team that's hopefully happy and healthy and strong and efficiently working in a pretty crazy time to build things that are going to make people really happy, improve people's lives, and just seeing how that's going to change. We're in such an interesting time where businesses that are at the forefront of connected technology are going to be exploding with growth. And
mhm,
and on the flip side of that, other businesses might see some downturns. Look at the oil and gas industry. People aren't driving their cars. Gas got super cheap. Now we've got a very different situation on our hands. And I think when we look at how the economy is going to change and shift, it's indicators that we all have to take into account.
mhm.
We're working differently than we've ever worked before. What tools are we going to need? What things are going to change for us fundamentally that we've got to think about?
I can only imagine with digital transformation only accelerating at this point that a product like CMDs is even that much more relevant and even going to grow that much
Yeah.
quicker along with all those apps.
You know what? I think you couldn't have positioned it better, Boo. The way that we're looking at different kind of technology in the space, the way that we're looking at people access different workloads, access sensitive systems, deploy applications to the cloud. Azure is running out of computers to deploy virtual machines on. It's
Mhm,
indicative that there is a second wave or a second massive generation of migration to the cloud, to Linux. And, inherently alongside that comes a lot of risk. And I think the one thing that we feel well positioned about is, we're understanding our consumers a lot better. We're understanding the market a lot better. The problems that those consumers are facing are getting more complicated, and unfortunately, the skills gap is still huge. A lot of people have been laid off, and it's pretty terrible. But not a lot of those people are security folks. Applications and the way that we approach defending our systems, protecting private information, doesn't really go away. Even if fewer customers are buying software in certain industries, it's a strange time. And look, I hope that we do see a growth out of the way that companies digitally transform. But the thing I'm most excited about is honestly seeing people increase and mature the security practices that they have. A lot of really quick decisions are being made right now that are inevitably going to add security complexities in the future. Where are we going to end up in the next 6 months? It's going to be an interesting story, but we're going to find out pretty soon, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. I can definitely say from my perspective, working with customers in the past couple months, there have been a lot of knee-jerk decisions, and people have been doing their best, and there's no fault to them. They've been doing their best, trying to do things securely, but move things forward very quickly. And I see compromises, and I'm sure there's compromises that I don't see with what they're doing. And there's a website that F5 has called F5 Labs, where one of our writers on there wrote a letter from the CISO to himself 6 months prior. And it's like, sorry about all of the things I did during COVID, but I had to do it at that point.
Yep.
If I could do it again, I would have done it this way, but here we are. And, we're going to get through this, but,
it's a scary time to be in infrastructure. And, when you think about those decisions that we're making to kind of get through, to just get by, sometimes they can feel really drastic, and hindsight is always 2020. And really the way that we've got to think about it is pragmatically. This is technical debt we're adding that we have to pay down eventually. And that technical debt costs you in the long run, especially when it's security considerations. I think it's going to be, it's a great way to approach it. Write yourself a letter in 6 months in the future. It's a good mentality. Maybe I'll do that as well, Boo. I think it's a good one.
But I mean, tying it back to CMD though, your product, from what I recall a couple of years ago, and I follow it here and there as well as you guys move forward, it is a product where you implement it. If you had it implemented already, you expand. It's very easy to just plug into everything else that you're building on top of and consolidate all your policies.
Effectively, what we've built, Bo, is the ability to enable companies that might not have the incredibly senior, very sophisticated security engineer building, mandatory access control policies on your team. We're empowering you to use simple policies and templates to move the needle from a security perspective in production. And it's moving the needle that we need to do, right? It's every step towards incremental security improvements that actually builds a better security posture for your organization. And the way that we look at security is, it's not necessarily just about defending against the nation state or the APT threat actor. They might be a problem for your organization, but there's definitely ways that you can improve your security posture to minimize the chance of that threat actor actually entering the environment in the first place. We primarily focus on user interaction with systems because it's where we see the largest point of risk. And so when we've got a developer deploying an application, or an engineer logging in to make a system change, or even now we've got remote access workers SSHing into systems to back things up to make changes. We're providing a very complete audit trail of what they're doing and how they're doing it. And we're taking that audit trail and building a set of policies around it, telling you about outliers, informing you of kind of risks to your environment, and inevitably helping you secure that system in a way that's not going to disrupt or destroy that developer's process. What we found was, when you're enabling people through security, they use the security controls that you're putting in place effectively. Not saying no, maybe asking a question, popping a note into a Slack channel, giving someone a heads up that you're just about to restart that service in production, and maybe it isn't a bad thing. Security is about collaboration and enabling developers and engineers and technologists to really solve problems in a way that makes sense in their current process. You can't just rip and replace everything. It's about enabling people's current processes. They're doing it for a reason. We're just there to help out and make some accountability around it along the way as well.
That's a smart way to look at it, I think, too. Like, actions can be good or bad, but through what you guys are doing with visibility, you can determine intent.
That's right. Yeah. It's really looking at that intent and being able to say, Jake might have needed to restart that database. Hey, he might have needed to back up that file, but really it's the old adage of trust but verify. Can we trust what you're doing? Well, yeah, we can trust you. We trust our developers, but it's probably best to double check what they're doing occasionally, and maybe if they're doing the wrong thing, or hey, look, if they just left their laptop on the train and someone's having a bit of a play around in production, it's probably good to know about it too. Maybe even block it. Yeah.
Very cool. Well, we've hit the hour here. Thank you very much for coming on, Jake. I think we could have talked for hours more, and maybe we'll have you on again if you're willing in due time. Yeah. Maybe we can even do like a Dragon's Den, and you can.
Can definitely find some folks we can bring on for that kind of thing. More than happy to, Boo. Yeah, it's been wonderful. Thank you for the time.
Yeah, I really appreciate you coming on. Appreciate you and knowing you as well. For everybody who hasn't subscribed, please hit subscribe below. If you're not on YouTube, head over to YouTube, youtube.com/DarylandBoo. Hit subscribe, hit the bell for notifications as well. Other than that, we will see you guys on Monday or Tuesday next week. Thank you very much, and we will end it here. Bye for now.